Hey guys, it's Carolyn, and welcome back to the podcast. And I'm so excited about today's guest. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Gretchen Gagel, a leader with 40 years in construction and founder of Women Thriving in Construction, a global institute. With degrees in mechanical engineering and an MBA and a PhD in leadership and change and agility, Gretchen brings unmatched expertise to the industry. She's the former chair of Brickman Construction and soon to be published author of Building Women Leaders, a blueprint for women thriving in construction. Join us as we explore her journey and insights on empowering women in construction. What a perfect time, too. It's March.
Yes, it is. We just completed Women in Construction Week and International Women's Day. And
I know.
yeah, it's a perfect time.
Very excited. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are now.
Oh, gosh. Well, we'll try and keep that a short story. I grew up in construction. My dad was a construction equipment dealer. And when I came out of engineering school, I was hired as Ralston Purina's first female production manager in 1986. So we had
Wow.
62 men and me.
Oh, wow.
And it kind of began my path of, I'm not sure exactly. It's funny, people have asked me this question, like, why did you do that? And I thought, well, someone has to do this, but it's not like I was purposely trying to be a trailblazer. I was really just trying to find something interesting to do out of engineering school.
Mm-hmm.
And later, after that career, in about 94, I joined FMI after doing my MBA. And a lot of your listeners will know FMI, large management consulting investment banking firm in the construction industry. Once again, just looking for something fun to do. I love the construction industry. I love the fact that we build and maintain civilization, essentially. And was it always an easy route? No, that would be an untruth. But I was with FMI for 11 years. I started their owner services group, left the industry for a few years just to get off a plane to finish raising my kids, came back as president of Continuum Advisor Group, another firm, and then moved to Australia in 2018 and I've been, kind of dividing my time between the two countries. But that's when I really fell into this passion for helping other women be successful in construction.
That's amazing. So from engineer to executive, tell us some of the good lessons you learned in those 40 years of being in the industry.
Don't be afraid to raise your hand for things. My third plant at Ralston Purina, we bought Beechnut baby foods from Nestle. It was a failing company.
Mm-hmm.
We'd been the ones that put sugar in baby apple juice and marketed it as pure. People went to jail over that. So we bought it and turned it around. And I asked to go to be involved in that because I knew I would learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another thing too, is never stop being curious. I think the day I stopped learning, I think I'm done with degrees. I actually have 4. I think I might be done with those, but to not be afraid to take risks, to remain curious, and to really invest in yourself as a leader. Nothing in engineering school prepared me for the fact that at 27, I think I was managing 800 union employees in a baby food plant. And that's why I went back at 50 and did the PhD in leadership, because I really wanted to understand the theory and the change part of it, how we create nimble organizations that can react to all the turbulence that's going on in the business environment. So really continuing to invest in myself as a leader and not feel like I'm done learning. I have all the answers.
So how does, like, someone who's working in the industry or a woman who has her own business, what does that look like? How does working on leadership? What is that? Books? Is that classes? What does that look like?
I think it's all of it. I fell into running women's leadership programs in the pipeline industry and now the crane industry when I got to Australia. I'd been a speaker at the American Gas Association's women's leadership program here in America and approached the pipeline industry over there and said, let's replicate this. And it's been wildly successful. In fact, that's why we were talking about my slight jet lag of Australia to the United States. I'm closing out the first American version of that with women from Google, Barton Mallow Turner, Duke Energy, Toyota. It's really been a fun program. So yes, mentors. I have 4 mentors. I'm
Mm-hmm.
60 years old and I still have 4 mentors. I still have a paid coach. People are surprised because I do coach CEOs and senior leaders that I have a coach, but I'm not done learning. And just a friend of mine started an organization called Mentor Walks. It's the first Friday of the month in most Australian cities. I'm sure there's something similar here where I'm paired up with a couple of people purposely. They curate it and we take an hour walk in the morning and I provide advice and mentoring. And my books, podcasts. I have a podcast on leadership greatness. So I got really crazy and started that podcast when I moved to Australia. I've got 145 episodes with Olympians
Wow.
and and so, business leaders and lifting up positive stories in construction. So there's so many different sources. I think the key is being deliberate and saying, I want to be a good leader. And I
Yeah.
want to carve the time. We're all so busy. Everyone
Mm-hmm.
end up busy. I'm going to ban that word from everybody's vocabulary. We're
It's
all
just prioritizing.
Yeah, really, you have to carve the time out and say, I'm going to meet with a coach once a month, or I'm going to sit down with my mentors, or I'm going to listen to one podcast a month. You don't have to do everything, but something that's saying, hey, and I think one thing that leads into that is getting regular feedback.
Yeah.
I've been anonymously reviewed by everyone who works for me for, oh gosh, maybe 30 years so that you really understand what your strengths are as a leader and where you could improve.
Do you give a survey? Do they?
I just did this too for an executive, a mining executive, a male. I coach men and women and do leadership for both men and women. I interviewed his entire team, flew to Perth last 3 weeks ago. We sat down. I always ask first what they think they said. It's always good to get that perception of where you think your strengths and opportunities are. And we put together a pretty concrete plan of here's some things that I can work on that people feel are going to make me a better leader.
That's interesting. That's a very
Mhm.
interesting approach. I mean, I guess we're better to learn how to be a better leader than the people you are already leading.
Exactly, exactly. And sometimes it includes peers. And um, I remember this is a great example. I was coaching a middle manager for a global engineering firm, and she sent out a survey. We were talking about her leadership brand and how people perceived her as a leader. And she came back and said, well, 5 people said I'm not assertive enough. And she said, I think I'm too assertive. And I said, well, if 5 people say you're not assertive enough, then there's something there. Go back and have a conversation with them and have them give you specific examples. In this meeting, this happened, and you could have been more assertive by doing this, or so it's the survey is the start. It
Hmm.
tells you kind of what rock to look under, but then having conversations with people and then saying, I would say to my team, here's a concrete example. They'd say, Gretchen, you don't tell us enough when you assign a project. Absolutely. Guilty as charged. I'm running at 100 miles an hour. And so I'd say, this is what I'm going to try, and then go
Hmm.
back for more feedback. Is that working? Is that helping things in being a leader?
That's funny. That's probably one of my biggest weaknesses too, is having clarity around. Here's what I need you to do, and
Yeah.
there's still not
Yeah.
not clear instructions. What did
Yeah.
you do
No,
to What did you do to work on that? I'm curious.
tried to be more present when I was assigning a project to someone, and then have them repeat back to me what they thought I had said, and asking Claire, are you clear on? And then the other thing is to do check-ins before the whole thing is done.
Yeah.
So let's check in when you're 10% or 20% into this project and just make sure we're still aligned, because John Cotter's great leadership acronym, set direction, align, and motivate. It's the aligning conversations about, is everybody on board with where we're going and why, or why we're doing this, or what this project is?
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Breaking the concrete ceiling. How can we help women thrive in the construction industry?
Well, I think men and women play a big part in that. And in the book, I didn't set out to write this book. Wiley asked me to write this book. There were days when I thought, oh my gosh, why did I decide to write a 350-page book about women leading in construction? But the book is for men too, and to understand allyship. When I first joined FMI in 1994, I didn't realize at the time, I do now, and I've thanked him, Lou Bainbridge, my first boss. We had contractors that said, I don't think you're sending Gretchen out to do my strategic plan. I need like a John or a David. And Lou's response to them was, well, then you're going to need to go find another consulting firm because Gretchen's an important part of our team. We really have to back women and realize there's only one chapter that's very gender specific. It's really just a book on leadership, but about dominant culture and unconscious bias that I still get. I was flying to DC last year to the AGC Diversity and Inclusion Committee meeting and got in a shared ride car. And the driver asked me if I was having a busy week. And I said, yeah, what was that week? Kansas City, Chicago, DC, New York. And he said, oh, are you a flight attendant? And yeah, you laugh, but I mean, I was in a business suit and I said, no, actually, I'm a business executive. And I said to him, do you think you would ask a man that question if he answered you that way? And he said, I probably wouldn't. And probably he would have asked him if he was a pilot, if he thought he was in aviation. So I think male allies taking the time to understand that their lived experience might be a little bit different than women and backing them. And then women need to back themselves. We all need to love the industry. Nobody should be doing anything that they don't love.
I agree.
Right. But I was working with an organization and they lost a male employee who had been a professional athlete. And they said, well, he just wasn't tough enough for the industry. And I thought, do we really need to be the industry that's so tough that a former professional athlete isn't tough enough? But yeah, so that's a little bit of it. Supporting women in the same way we would support men. It's not a man or a woman thing, but just realizing that different people have different experiences in the industry.
I do think it's a tough industry. I guess I'm kind of biased because that's all that I work in, but it seems a lot tougher than other industries. And especially when, I deal with contracts and all of that, sometimes it seems very one-sided for the people doing the work, so the people who are hiring the people to do the work.
No, it's a very, when you think about the complicated things that we're accomplishing too, and the 2 years I was on the judging panel for the Australian Construction Achievement Awards, which was so fun. I chaired it the second year. I was the first female chair, and they let an American chair it. How crazy is that? But one of the winners was a tunnel built under the Sydney, downtown Sydney and the Sydney Harbor, around tunnels that were built in the 1950s and all the vibration monitoring that needed to be done around the foundations in these other tunnels to make sure that other tunnels don't collapse that have trains in them with people in them.
Yeah.
So we're often working in dangerous situations. We're building things that need to stay up, high rises and things of that nature. There's a lot on the line.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here in Kansas City where the Hyatt collapse was one of the largest disasters in our industry, and I happen to know the contractor and the field change that was made that caused those two glass walkways, and in fact was supposed to be there. I couldn't get off from work. I was in high school at the time, and I think 140 people died in that accident. So we've got that kind of pressure. We've got schedule pressures. We have the pressures of past litigation and conflict and all that baggage that everybody carries around from project to project. And so it's a very pressure-filled industry. And I think we can make it better.
I agree.
I sit on the Construction Industry Culture Task Force for Australia, and we've piloted 5 projects now where we've focused on well-being, diversity, and time away from work. And these projects are on schedule, under budget. I mean, but it's a deliberate, we're going to have people have a different lived experience on this project. And
that's interesting.
We're problem solvers. We can fix this.
I agree. And it would be I guess coming at it from a perspective of the emotional well-being of the people that are on the project, as opposed to just getting the stuff done. That's a completely different perspective.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people working on it. Teresa Magnus wrote a book with her partner that's a field guide for trade well-being. We're the highest suicide in both countries, Australia and America. And I know Microsoft was piloting the program on one of their projects. And I know of other companies. Once again, I think the client's going to drive it. The client drove it in safety with the Construction Industry Institute
Mm-hmm.
decades ago, getting serious about safety and saying, hey, if you don't have a TRIR of this, you're not going to be able to bid on our job.
Yeah.
I think we need to get just as focused and because and this isn't a woman thing. This generation, the people in their 20s, don't want to be driven into the ground. They're not going to come work for us, and we need the most talented people to come into the construction industry for it to be sustainable.
Yeah, and it's definitely a different perspective and it's not money that drives them.
No, and they're not going to. There was a research study presented at the joint CURT CII conference probably 3 years ago that showed I don't remember what the terms they used about, just a little bit of harassment and poor behavior and things like that. And the more tenured people, yeah, it's what I dealt with.
Yeah.
We all, I mean, gosh, could sit and tell a lot of stories about those. But the young people are like, nope, not putting up with it. I'm out
Yeah.
of here. So we do need to do things differently. Unfortunately, we're also busy running from project to project, and we have a shortage of people in our industry right now.
Yeah.
So taking the time to be thoughtful and really think about how we operate in a different way is really critical.
I agree. So tell us more about your new book. Tell me some of the successful women leader stories that you have in there.
Oh yeah. It was a great exercise. It ended up being a bit more autobiographical. So some of my stories are in there, but I interviewed 50 industry leaders, male and female. And I included blurbs from probably about 60 of my podcast guests. So the Olympians and Anna Mears are in there as well. And it was just so uplifting to really think about how many phenomenal women we do have in the industry, how many men are being very deliberate in helping those women, knowing not to the disadvantage of men. I have to
Mm-hmm.
stress this,
Yeah.
that there's a backlash about, well, an underqualified woman's getting a man's job. That's not what we're talking about here. Over and over again, I heard a woman say, I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I was qualified for that job. And a man saying, I told her she needed to apply for that job. Or a woman even saying that to another woman. And I think that's another thing. When I came into the industry, women were being kind of pitted against each other. In the 90s, it was like there's one seat at the table and I'm getting it, and there's not another seat.
Mm-hmm.
I think woman to woman allyship is unbelievably critical. And in fact, 2 years ago, I lived in Denver for 20 years. 2 years ago, I bought a place in Kansas City. Both my grown kids ended up in my hometown of Kansas City, which I left in 1982, which is kind of bizarre. And I've set out to meet construction people. I mean, I've known Steve Edwards, former CEO of Black & Veatch, for 3 decades probably. So I knew people here, but just trying to make new friends. And I've started a thing I do in Denver as well, of having a dinner of 20 women executives in construction with J.E. Dunn and McCown Gordon and Black & Veatch and Burns & Mac and all the great companies that are located here in Kansas City. And it's a blast. They're like, what are we going to do? I'm like, nothing. We're going to have dinner and be supportive of one another. And I think that's another key message that came out in the book. And then there's just a lot of good stuff in the book I've learned about leadership, how to interrelate with people one-on-one. Edgar Schein, noted academic from MIT, calls them level 2 relationships, how to build trust, how to lead high-performing teams. I must have worked with, I don't know, I wish I'd kept a list, 500 construction teams. I don't
Wow.
know what that number is. Baltimore Ravens Stadium to Intel, General Motors, and then really thinking about an organization's culture, which drives back to the culture of the industry and how to lead in the industry, how to step up and raise your hand and say, I'm going to join AGC or ABC or NAWIC or somebody and try and help the industry be a better place.
That's awesome. So when does your book come out?
That is a very good question because it is sitting right over there, and I just read it for, I think, what feels like the 200th time. We're trying to, with 130 people in the book, we're trying to make sure all the names are correct and all that. Right now, I think it's available for pre-order on Amazon as we speak.
Gotcha.
I think they've got a date of April 15th on
Wow.
there, so
That's soon.
It is. I'm speaking at the AGC convention, if anyone's going to be there, April 9th, with Tom Riley, the president of Turner, one of his female leaders, Sam Clark, the CEO of Clark Construction, and one of his female leaders
Awesome.
on April 9th. And I'm also speaking at the Groundbreaking Women in Construction Conference in June in San Diego. So lots of opportunities to hear me speak about the book and the future successes of women in our industry.
That's amazing. What unique leadership skills do you think are most valuable that women can offer the industry?
Well, I think I think it's all different kinds of people offer different things. And when I went down a lot of rabbit holes in my PhD, just out of curiosity, there's so much research, whether it's age, gender, socioeconomic background, geographic background, whatever those differences are. When we put teams of people together, they make better decisions. Team IQ, it's called. So the IQ of a team, how fast a team can complete a task, is not based on the IQ of the individuals. That would, I guess, make it easier. And having women on teams is one of the significant factors that increases team IQ. I hate to make very broad gender, sweeping gender statements, but I do think that science is now showing. I have a friend, Kristen Hansen, who wrote a book called Traction about neuroleadership. She's a neuroscientist. She takes a brain with her everywhere she goes. Only person I know that travels around with a plastic brain. But she's really helped me understand that physically our brains are different. So women have what she describes as a 12-lane superhighway between the right and left sides of our brain, whereas men have an old country road. And that's not a slam on men. It's just physically describing our brains. And so when it comes to multitasking and things like that, which does cut your productivity when we're task switching all the time. So we shouldn't be using all 12 lanes of that highway all the time. But there's things physiologically about us that are different that we're even learning more about in our brains. And I think the one thing that I would encourage women listening and men to be present to, a lot of us when we came in the industry thought we had to act like the men.
Yeah.
Like I wore blue blazers and I smoked cigars when I played golf and, everything just to fit in. Be authentic to yourself. I have a framework called grounded self-leadership, and it says our own leadership is grounded in our values and our purpose. And it's okay to bring the softer skills. It's okay to bring whatever skills uniquely you bring to leadership and to not try and be large and in charge, loudest leader, because that's what you've seen modeled as being successful in our industry. And I think culturally, as an industry and organizations, giving space to people. I heard a young man speak in Sydney where he said he was passed up for promotions because he wasn't seen as loud and in charge enough. And so creating space for different types of leaders is going to make our organizations better because once again, we have that diverse thinking.
Yeah. And I do think women think differently than men. Usually we end up at the same place. We just get there two different ways.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah. So tell me about your institute, Women Thriving in Construction. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is craziness, really. About 4 years ago, I was reading a study about women in the trades, and we're at about, there's debate by trade, less than 4%. Some people say 4.5%. I don't know. I'm not going to argue about 4.5%, but it's little.
Yeah.
I just don't understand. I don't
Mhm.
understand why only 4% of electricians are female, or carpenters for that matter, or whatever. I don't get it. And so I thought, gosh, somebody has to do something about this. And as I started putting together the book tour, I thought, I think I want to do something about this. And when I left the construction industry, I ran a women's foundation for 5 years where I built two major coalitions where a lot of fragmented things were being done. Somebody needed to bring everybody together and make it a very powerful thing happen. And it was a lot of fun. And so, Women Thriving in Construction is that type of global institute where we want to be the go to source on data on women. So, we've just published our first research study looking at 20 countries
Really.
and the percentage of women in construction in each. I have a meeting later today. FMI is our research partner, by the way. We're doing one trade by trade in America, so we have a good baseline. We want to then convene the right stakeholders, whether that's general contractors or diving into a trade, unions, associations, employers, and say, great, what's working that we need to scale? And what have we not even tried? And that's the third piece, is scaling things. When we see a little program over here in Tennessee that's getting women welders into the industry. Well, great. How do we throw $3 million at that and get, because we have a shortage. Oh, by the way, we're short 750,000 people in the
Yeah.
industry right now. And then the fourth piece of it is to work on the image. I want a hit Netflix series or a great Super Bowl ad or something. And once again, this is not just for women. This is our industry and attracting those really talented people and telling the story of how amazing our industry is. So that's the fourth pillar. So we've created a board, and I'm putting on my fundraising hat to get the funding going. And we have the support of major organizations like NAWIC. We're not trying to replace anything that the National Association of Women in Construction is doing. We're trying to accelerate it.
Mm.
And yeah, it's pretty exciting and scary all at the same time.
So I think those are all great ideas. And practically, as a woman, you're raising kids and trying to be a welder, run a business. I mean,
Yep.
it's how does that
Good.
all work? How can we make
Yeah.
that easier, I guess?
Well, that was my first book I wrote, 8 Steps to Being a Great Working Mom, and you can find my TEDx talk about it. I flew well, I shouldn't say every week. I flew 48 weeks out of the year until my kids were 7 and 8 years old. I flew 100,000 miles and had a baby in the same year, domestically.
Oh my
So I am the poster child for, and towards when my kids were teenagers, my mother had dementia and Alzheimer's. I quit my job for 6 months and was single. So it is challenging, and it's just as challenging for the men now because 75% of moms work. So when you think about 50 years ago, the men went off to work. They didn't have to think about child pickup and all the things that they're juggling. So this is not just, I wrote 8 Steps to Being a Great Working Mom because I experienced it from a mom perspective, but I think it's just as challenging for the men. We have to get more creative. Job sharing. Why does one person need to be on the job 14 hours? Why can't two people each be on the job 7 hours? And it's not just that tactical, it's the psychological. So I was on a job site in a trailer, and they said, "No, I think John needs to leave." And John's kind of, John's uncomfortable saying it's 5 o'clock. John has to leave. And finally I said, "Well, John's son's in a play." And I turned to John, I said, "Leave, like, just leave. It's fine." "Well, we're not kind of done talking about." I said, "Just leave, just get up and leave." And so once again, it's that, it's getting creative, but creating a culture where people feel like they can raise their hand and say, "Hey, I've got something going on with my kid." I'll give you a great story. Years ago, I flew to, I think it was the Bahamas, to speak to the SMACNA board. and they had a travel job, one of the board members, and a guy was coaching his son in soccer. So they sent a different person for the first half of the job so he could finish coaching his son's soccer league. And then he went and managed the job for the second half of it. But sharing those examples and not trying to hide the fact that we all have lives and kids and dying parents and health problems and all those things, and creating an industry that makes it okay for us to manage those aspects of our life, I think is really critical.
So tell me more about the steps. How are they? What are the 8
The 8
steps?
steps? Well, the first is to get over the guilt. Well, actually, I think the first one is to set realistic expectations. We feel like we can all be Heidi Klum and Martha Stewart and Bill Gates all wrapped up into one 24/7. And actually, the reason I wrote the book is that a friend came to me when my kids were young, gosh, 2 and 3 maybe. She was having her first child and said, "You have it all. You've got it all. How do I do this?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, that's a facade. I am one sick nanny day away from complete disaster." But what I realized is we weren't having that conversation. We were all looking at each other and saying, "Well, she can keep her nails done. And how is she doing this?" And nobody wanted to raise their hand and say, "This is hard." And I wrote the book for her. I didn't publish it for another 10 years. I interviewed 25 more women from different socioeconomic backgrounds and published the book. And so setting realistic expectations for yourself. When my mother had Alzheimer's and I was still working, I couldn't go see her every day. So I said 1.5 hours on Saturday, quality time. That's it. Get over it. Don't feel guilty because other people maybe see their parents 3 times a week. Sitting down and asking my kids, what's important to you that I'm there for? I can't be there for every concert, every ice hockey game. What's important to you? Putting together a real support network and having plan A, B, and C in place, because plan A is going to fall down on a regular basis. Yeah, and self-care. So I had a major health scare 15 years ago with my heart. I had PVCs and PACs, premature ventricular contractions and premature atrial. I spent a month in bed. I was on a beta blocker for 5 years because I wasn't exercising. I now run at least 4 days a week. I have a new strength trainer, Davey, who's kicking my behind. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first. You have to carve that time out to take care of yourself, because you're no good to your team, your kids, or anybody if you're not taking care of yourself.
Wow, that's all so amazing. I'm very inspired.
Yeah, and sleep. And I write about this in the book, The Pie of Life. I regularly do this. I'm looking around because my journal is around here somewhere, because I was there it is right there. I was writing it yesterday. Draw a circle. Put 168 at the top. That's how many hours we have. You cannot make that circle bigger. You cannot blow that balloon up. The first slice of the pie of life for me every time is sleep. I sleep 7. I have monitors. I know I slept 7 hours and 20 minutes last night. Exercise. You vote for your priorities with your time, and you have to be ruthless in your boundaries and transparent. My teams can see on my calendar when I'm running, when I'm taking time out to go to the gym, and not sweep it under the rug. We have to take care of ourselves.
I agree. That's huge. So if people want to know more about your institute or more about you, where should they go?
Yeah, GretchenGagel.com is my personal website. The institute is womenthrivingInconstruction.org, not .com, .org. And the book, Building Women Leaders, A Blueprint for Women Thriving in Construction, is available on Amazon, and you can find out more information about that on GretchenGagel.com. And then my podcast, Greatness. It's slowing down a little bit because I'm coming on a lot of great construction podcasts like this one. But as I said, I have 145 episodes about great stories in construction, of a story of a project with 53% women on it. Can you
That's
believe it?
amazing.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah. So fun things like that. So Greatness, if you look for it in Spotify, you can find my podcast as well.
Awesome. Is your first book available on Amazon?
Yep. 8
Okay.
Steps of Being a Great Working Mom. And you can find my TEDx talk. If you just Google TEDx Gretchen Gagel, it's not, I think it's only 10 minutes or so. I tell a very interesting construction related story at the beginning that the whole audience went, "Ah," when I did the punchline in the story. And I mean, it's funny now. What it was about things people were saying when I became pregnant about whether my husband was going to let me keep working and things like that. But
Oh, God.
anyway, yeah, it's a funny story.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on my podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. It was really wonderful and I enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.